Good evening, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank Professor Shivkumar and Team Preeti for giving an opportunity to share my thoughts on pediatric ankle injuries. From the more complex trauma and all the controversies, we'll come to a simple and straightforward situation, pediatric ankle fractures. And I also would like to acknowledge my colleague and friend, Mr. Gogilas, who shared with his case series. Pediatric ankle fracture has been given into this complex trauma, but it's not so complex. I mean, as long as we understand the anatomy and the common injury pattern, it will be straightforward, and we'll say about the growth plate anatomy and the risk factors for premature fascial closure, and with a few case examples. I mean, like an adult ankle fractures, apart from stability and secondary osteoarthritis, the main reason we are talking about pediatric ankle fractures here is because of the premature fascial closure. And here in this X-ray, you could see that the growth arrest lines are not parallel to the physis. So they are sloping towards the medial side, suggesting that there has been a medial growth arrest, which, if left around like this, would give rise to a talar tilt and lateral abutment and future deformity and increasing pain. So the whole idea of this talk is, if you could minimize this chance of premature fascial closure, I'm sure we'll not be able to prevent it, but we should be able to minimize the risk of premature fascial closure. And Harish described the anatomy in the morning, and the initial thought was the zone of hypertrophy in the physeal region is the weak spot. And in case of high velocity injury, as he mentioned, all the growth plates, the germinal, resting, proliferative layer, everything would be affected. But whereas in ankle injuries, it's mostly a low velocity injury with a twisting strain, and the line of failure is usually the hypertrophic zone. And depending on the line of exit, then you have the various fracture classification with Sandra Harris. One more thing I would like to point out here is this perichondral ring. So with the growth plate injuries, we also can damage the perichondral ring, but it can be iatrogenic also. So with our approach, we need to be careful that we don't damage the perichondral ring. So these are some of the risk factors for the premature fascial closure or the growth arrest. And as you could see, Salter-Harris type 3 and type 4 has got much more risk than type 1 and 2, especially in ankles. And the much talked about triplane fracture and telar fracture usually don't have much of growth plate problems because they happen late towards the end of the maturity. And really all other factors actually suggest the high velocity injury. So if it is high velocity injury, then they'll have a fibula fracture, and pronaction abduction violence is again high velocity injury, which all can lead to premature fascial closure. And this magic number 3 millimeter has come from the study by Brahmada. So in their study, they looked at about 92 patients, and they noticed that if the physeal widening is more than 3 millimeter, then the chance of premature fascial closure is 60%, and when it is less than 3 millimeter, it drops down to 17%. And the growth arrest is not necessarily affected by the number of reduction attempts for fascial fracture, but we don't need to hang on to that. So if there is a difficulty in reduction, just need to find out why there is a difficulty in reduction, what is interposing, and then go for open reduction. And it is not affected by the initial displacement of the fracture, but timing does play a role. And if it is displaced for longer duration, it can lead to skin compromise. This can lead into further problems. And the method of treatment also does not necessarily affect the growth arrest. And it basically means that it's a close reduction or open reduction as long as we don't violate the physis. Right. And we'll see a few case examples. Salter-Harris type 1 of the distal tibial physis is much more common, but more than that is the distal fibula, which is much more common. Right? And we all know that the ligaments are stronger than the physis, and the moment somebody comes with an ankle sprain, especially in the pediatric age group, and our thinking is that they all have type 1 distal physeal injury of the distal fibula. But the study from Toronto, which involved 135 kids, they scanned all those radiologically negative patients for an MRI scan and found that only 4 of them had MRI-proven injury. So from the traditional thought that all those kids with ankle sprain has got fracture, it goes up and it looks like probably they have also got ankle sprain and a bone contusion. So my treatment plan for child like this would be, if the child is able to weight bear, we can give them a cast and keep them for about 3 weeks and mobilize them. So this is an example of soldered wrist type 2 facial injury where the force goes through the physis and taken off a posterior part of the metaphysis. And soldered wrist type 2 injuries are much more common, and it's considered about 40% of the facial injuries. And most of the time, with adequate sedation, we should be able to reduce it closed. And after reduction, if you find it stable, then they could be managed very well in a plaster cast. But if there's a failure of reduction, the most common soft tissue interposition would be periosteum. So don't hesitate to go for an open approach. And then assess for stability. If it is stable enough, you can still manage them on a plaster. Next, we talk about the soldered wrist type 3 injury. And the injury here is this called the tibia fracture. This is the anterior inferior tibiofibular ligament is a part of syndesmosis. And this happens because of the variable rate of physial arrest, which we'll talk about a bit later. The reason we're talking about tibia fracture is here because it is quite subtle. Looking at the AP view, the fracture pattern is here, and if you are not aware of this injury, you could miss this fracture and cause onto the trouble. So a CT scan will be of help, and if you could see the CT scan, there is a fracture of the anti-infratibular ligament avulsion that forms the tibia component, and there is a small component, the posterior malleoli also, that's the chopper fracture. So this can be accessed by anterolateral approach, as Dr. Amit explained now, and then you can fix the tibia fragment by a lateral medial screw and the posterior malleolus by the anteroposterior screws. Then this is an example for a soldered wrist type 4 injury, and here you could see the medial malleolus is broken with a small flake of metaphyseal fragment. And here the magic is, because it involves the physis, there is an articular step, and the articular step of less than 2 mm is not acceptable, so we need to plan for a open reduction, achieve anatomic reduction and fixation. Next, we come to this much talked about this triplane injury. The triplane injury happens because of the variable pattern of the distal tibial physeal closure. This distal tibial physis starts closing about 13-14 years and takes about 18 months before the complete closure. So they start on the central, then they start closing on the medial side, then on the lateral side, and the last part is the anterolateral and the posterolateral corner, and that's why you get this typical pattern of either triplane fracture or the tibia fracture. So depending on the fragment involved, you could get either large lateral triplane fracture, which could be either 2-part or a 3-part, depending on the number of fragments, or a medial triplane fracture. And here in the AP X-ray, you could see it looks like a soldered wrist type 4 injury, whereas in the lateral profile, it looks like a type 2 injury. So CT scan will be crucial to identify the fracture pattern and then place the screws. Again, depending on the fracture fragment, either you go with an anterolateral approach or an anteromedial approach, and then fix it either medially or laterally. And this is one more case example where things has gone wrong. And here again, I don't have the pre-op X-ray, and it shows a tibia fragment in the anterolateral corner and some metaphyseal spike. So what they try to achieve is try to get the tibia fragment from lateral to medial. So, and if you look at the CT scan here, the proximal 2 fragment has got the metaphyseal spike, but the distal screw is slightly posterior and it's completely missed the fragments. And this was subsequently revised by an anterolateral approach, and we got an anatomic reduction, and this is 10 weeks post-op. So in essence, pediatric ankle fracture, it is not much complex trauma as long as you understand the various fracture pattern and remember the magic numbers of with a 5-set displacement of more than 3 millimeter and articular step of more than 2 millimeter, angulation more than 10 degrees not acceptable. This is something for recommended reading. Thank you.